Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program this evening. I'm sure it's going to be another exciting session. And do share the link with your friends, invite them, let them know the prof is in the house, and we are ready to go. Prof, you are welcome again this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for giving me another opportunity to share our thoughts with our viewers. I noticed you said it's going to be an exciting evening, but I thought the world is rather quiet this week. So, what are you cooking up that I'm not aware of?
Oh, okay, Prof. Let's start with, oh dear. Okay, let's start with Jordan. Prof, Jordan is an interesting um, royal situation that is evolving because now we have a member of the royal family who is he's been accused of trying to destabilize the country. And let's start with that, Prof. What do you have to say about that?
Well, you know, I was without knowing the details because they are speaking in tongues, so to speak. But the foundation of this crisis was probably laid by the last king who uh, had made somebody a crown prince and indicated that that one will succeed him. And then at the last minute, he made this present king his successor and downgraded the previous one. And I will not be surprised if this has been simmering as an intra family issue because, I mean, unless there are things that we don't know about, uh, several people, including the prince, have been accused of collusion with external forces. Now, usually in the Middle East, when you talk about external forces, uh, there are usually, the usual candidates: Israel, the Palestinians, Iran, now uh, Turkey. Four candidates who are the usual troublemakers in that area. There are other troublemakers. ISIS is still there, hanging at the back. Syria is still there, even though Syria has enough of its own domestic issues. So, who are the people that who are the external forces that are supposed to be involved um, in the domestic affairs of Jordan? I think we can rule out Israel because the relationship between Israel and Jordan has always been exceptionally close. Uh, Nothing to warrant Israel wanting to change the parameters of the relationship. So that still leaves the others. Um, if you plot the trajectory of the relationship between the Palestinians and Jordan is not a friendly relationship, especially after the former leader of the Palestinian, Yasser Arafat, and the PLO, family were expelled from Jordan, not under this present king, but his father, the previous king. So I wouldn't think that the Palestinians would be up to anything at this time. So who are we talking about? That's why I said, will it be Turkey? Will it be Iran? Will it be ISIS? So really, it's an enigmatic development. We need to watch it,
Mhm.
but it's very unusual for Jordan. Jordan is usually a stable monarchy and a stable kingdom. Uh, Getting along fairly calmly. So it surprised me when the news came out. So really, the bottom line is, let us watch it. I just don't know,
Prof,
but
there is
it doesn't bode well for Jordan, and it doesn't bode well for the Middle East.
Prof, there is a question some are raising, and this is when we think about the last 3, 4 weeks, and we look at some of the issues about the British royal family. And Jordan, as you have rightfully highlighted, generally quiet, but now we're starting to see this internal squabble playing out very publicly. And in the case of Jordan, you're getting international involvement in this. I think the US has commented on it as well. Are we starting to see a trend of dissatisfaction with what is going on within royal families and how power is being passed from one group to another at all?
Um, that wouldn't be my narrative. Um, in a way, the royal setup in Jordan is rather peculiar because really there isn't one royal family as such. Uh, I mean, without meaning any disrespect to the Jordanians, it is still a coalition of tribes or of ethnic groups or of ethnic nationalities, whatever language you want to use, in Jordan. And the heads of these competing nationalities kind of gave their agreement to the Hashmonite dynasty to rule. If one of them, especially one of the major ones, withdraws his recognition of the dynasty, it spells doom for Jordan. So what what is it? That's why I said we don't really have enough data for one to be to have a concrete narrative about what's going on in Jordan. They've talked about corruption, but then I mean anybody who knows anything about Jordan, even under the last king, knows that there has always been corruption. In order to keep things going, uh, you know, making funds and access to funds, access to properties, access to opportunities available to key agents in the security forces, and distributed among the heads of the ethnic nationalities in Jordan. So obviously somebody is dissatisfied. One group is dissatisfied. Maybe it's not getting enough share of its own, or maybe in appointments. Some are starting to feel marginalized. I just don't know. We need to get more details.
on that front. All right. While we're still in the area, we've also seen some tension building around the restart of talks between Iran and the U.S. regarding the nuclear deal, which Israel is clearly against that. First of all, what do you say to this start of conversations? And secondly, there was an attack on an Iranian vessel, which has been blamed on Israel. What is your take on these 2 points, Prof?
Well, the talks, we all know from the beginning that the talks are going to be problematic. Not in the sense that both parties don't know where they want to go. Is one, how to get there, and two, how to insulate the talks from interference by the usual suspects who don't want Israel, who don't want the United States and Iran to reach any agreement at all. Now, diplomacy by proximities is something that is quite common. We're used to that. When people don't want to talk face to face, they want to avoid um, we want to avoid sitting face to face. I've usually been quite amused, really, uh, at the protocol involved in proximity talks, because you are talking. It's just that you're not sitting in the same room. At times, diplomacy looks like a childish game. Yeah, you won't be in the same hotel, but it's another. They will pick two hotels, one across the road from the other. Both parties are aware of the presence of there, and then you will both agree to designate somebody who will go in between, bringing messages back and forth, back and forth. Well, I said it serves the purpose of what we in diplomacy call plausible deniability. So if Iran says, oh, the United States has agreed to this, and there's an uproar in the United States or in Israel, Americans could always say, no, we didn't agree to that. The ingo between must have misunderstood us or misrepresented us. No, signals like that. I think, however, that it is a good step forward, that at least they're exchanging messages, even if not face to face. Number two, who could have been responsible for attacking that ship? It's not Israel may not necessarily be the culprit, even though people think it should be number one on the list, even if it isn't, the suspect. It could be Saudi Arabia, who also is not comfortable with Iran and the United States talking and reaching an agreement over this issue. So let's hope that cool heads will prevail. Iran will hesitate to retaliate, especially to get its the identity of the culprit certain before it takes any step. And hopefully, I mean, if I were advising the Iranians, I would say your ultimate objective, which is to reach agreement with the United States, is by far more important to you than the identity of who hit your ship. In fact, the uncertainty over the identity of the culprit could be an advantage for Iran, who could legitimately claim we are ready to hit back when we are sure of who did it. But since we are not sure of who did it, investigation is still being carried out. And when we know who did it, then we will retaliate. Of course, even after they know who did it, common sense may dictate just keeping quiet over that identity. Because, I mean, there are people who have satellites monitoring what's going on in the world all over the place. The French government does, the Americans do, the British do, the French know, and all of these people, routinely monitor events around that area. So I'm sure there are people who already know who did it, but said it is in Iran's interest to pretend that investigation is still going on while they focus on negotiation with the Americans.
One thing that has come to light, Prof, is which is common knowledge, like I said earlier, is this issue of Israel. Now, if this deal goes ahead, and the US, Iran are able to agree a deal, Israel has made it clear that what they did in 2015, what they signed in 2015, is not acceptable. Sanctions have been placed by the United States on Iran. Iran is asking for those sanctions to be removed. But if they were to get to a point where they do sign a deal and Israel is not happy with that deal, what would you expect the response to be from Israel?
Grumble, issue a statement. No, I mean, Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, is also a master of the diplomatic game. But one thing I'm absolutely certain Israel will not do is attack Iran. Um, um, they could, I mean, there are games they could play. That's where the secret agents are there. They've been playing these games anyway, even when the United States withdrew from the agreement, assassination of Iranian scientists, all kinds of things. You know, where Israel has an advantage over the rest of the world is that there is no Western country where citizens occupying high posts in the land may not be Jewish. And Western countries have accepted that there's a dichotomy between being Jewish and being Zionist. Zionism usually implies support for Israel, while being Jewish is not necessarily synonymous with support for Israel. So therefore, there are a lot of Jewish people who are citizens of other countries and who occupy, as I said, high posts there. And so Israel can easily activate any of these people who may be secret admirers of Israel. In other words, they may be secret Zionists. In a way that if France decides to do something in Africa, yes, of course, it could pull up, from Cote d'Ivoire or Burkina Faso, Africans who have loyalties and an admiration for France. They may be agents of the French, and so France may decide to use them in other African countries in order to mask the identity of whoever is going to do something. But at least you are still going through, if you like, a third country. Whereas in the case of Israel, it could be, do you know whether there are Iranian, in fact, not that, there are Iranian Jews. There are. This is something that had come out of, going into exile after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple by the Romans. They're just scattered all over the world. And that's why there's no country in the Western world. And when I don't want to use the term in the white world, but when I say in the Western world, that includes Russia, Belarusia, where there are no Jews. So
Prof,
the Israel can do a few funny things, but not a frontal military attack on Iran. Israel will not do that.
Prof, you mentioned something there, and I wonder if we should take a slight detour in terms of Jews who were scattered abroad, because in Israel they were celebrating Holocaust Day today, and they went through the period of silence where they listened out and they remembered what happened during the Holocaust. And some people have drawn a bit of a parallel between, well, what happened during the Holocaust and what happened with Africa and slavery. Some have even gone to the extent of saying, see where Israel is now, despite the challenges, versus where Africa is. Um, do you want to shed some light on that, Prof?
I think that they are making references to two totally different things. Um, um, the celebration of the Holocaust by Israel, the way it is celebrated year in, year out, the fact that actually there are two celebrations. I think there's a World Holocaust Day and a Holocaust Day, uh, two separate two separate occasions celebrating the same day. What I would have brought up is how come Israel attaches significance, and the rest of the world identifies with the Israel celebration of the victims of Holocaust. Let's put it that way. 6 million Jews killed by the Nazis during the Second World War. 6 million. And yet Africa lost this is an estimate. Of course, we will never have the correct figures. Documents have been lost, things are not documented, but Africa lost probably something close to 30 million people during the slave trade. 30 million people. Now, how did I arrive at that estimate? You will include people who were lost during the intra-ethnic wars instigated by the Portuguese, the British, the Spaniards, whatever, in order to capture people. You will include that. Number two, you will include those loaded onto the ships from various African African ports. You will include those who died during the transatlantic transportation and who were buried at sea, and then those actually who landed in the Americas or in Europe and in Europe. Then you will have to include the Africans who are transported across the Sahara Desert. We don't talk about that for reasons I will deal with later. We don't talk about that because that is the Arab slave trade in Africa. Then you will have to include Africans who were shipped across the Indian Ocean to Southeast Asia and Asia, India, China, what have you. When you put all these figures together, you will get around 30 million. So compare how Africa itself deals with the memory of these 30 million souls Africa lost. Think of how the rest of the world associates with African remembrance of these people and compare it with the 6 million. with the way Israel remembers the 6 million Jews who were killed during the Second World War. Of course, part of the purpose of the remembrance activities is to ensure that the world does not forget these victims, and we shouldn't. But what also do, we Africans, to ensure that the rest of the world does not forget that we lost 30 million souls during, that period. So it's really what I will focus on. Now, we Africans, in a way, have been, if you like, agents of our own misfortune, because I regard the way we remember the whole slavery episode as a misfortune for Africa. Now, why do I say we are agents of our own misfortune? The fact that Africans south of the Sahara and Arab countries in Africa are joint members of the African Union, really means that the one institution that unites all Africans also includes those who took part in the slave trade. And it becomes inconvenient to raise the issue. I recall that Ali Mazrui, an extremely exciting scholar, African stroke Arab lineage, did a BBC program called the Triple Heritage. Basically what we Africans share with the Arabs on this continent. And he was taken to the cleaners by Wole Soyinka, who said that Ali Mazrui played down the factor of the Arab slave trade in order to talk about triple heritage of religion, culture, and what have you. And it is true. But Ali Mazrui was also reflecting what one would regard as the lack of focus on the political stage by African leaders who, at the time of independence, felt that they wanted to confront the rest of the world with a united Africa. Not united organically, but united in terms of, the continental space which they occupied. And, the presence of Nasser, the King of Morocco, Bourguiba in Tunisia, and so on, strengthened the African, not confrontation, but the African, the attempt by the African leaders to put Africa on the world map as an independent entity. And that therefore, you couldn't raise issues which may defeat that purpose. But there were African leaders like Mobutu Sese Seko, of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, who actually raised that issue and called for another organization that would just be for Africans south of the Sahara, all the way to South Africa. And if you want to keep the African Union that included North Africa, fine. But there should be another African organization. Of course, it didn't receive a hearing. Maybe if that initiative has succeeded, it is possible that we may commemorate Slavery Day in the same way and manner in which Israel commemorates Holocaust Day. So, frankly, that is what I will focus on. I mean, there are a lot of parallels. There are a lot of parallels between Africa and Africans in the diaspora, and Israel and the Jews in the diaspora. Oh yes, we share a lot and we do also share quite a lot in terms of suffering. But I don't believe, now this is controversial what I'm saying, but I don't believe that the suffering of 30 million Africans and the havoc that slave trade wreaked on Africa can be equated with 6 million Jews lost during the Second World War.
Prof, but some may argue here that, well, this is the problem of Africa, right? Yes, 30 million, 6 million, but see where Israel is technologically, see where Israel is, even if we just look at agriculture, um, where they are, if we look at military capability. Yes, economy, there may be issues around the economy in Israel and things like that, and political challenges that they have. But Africa still seems to be lagging behind when we look at all these areas that I've touched on here. And the question keeps coming up, Prof. What is the African problem?
Well, I don't think we can compare mangoes with guavas, really. We can't. Um, at the end of the Second World War, Israel was still basically a peasant agricultural country, not really different from the Arab countries that surrounded it. And then what happened, which people maybe don't want to talk about? There was a massive influx of Western educated Jews from Europe into Israel. They were, I mean, some of them have been scientists in Germany, in Poland, in Russia, extremely well educated professionals, and they came in and they became the agents of change, and they are still the agents of change in Israel up till today. There hasn't been, and I stand to be corrected, there hasn't been an original Israeli Jew who had become prime minister of Israel. They have all been Jews in the diaspora who came back home. All of them. Now, The only way the issue you are raising will arise is if Americans from the diaspora, I mean Africans from the diaspora, let's put it that way, had then come back to Africa to take over the reins of government. That is when you could then start to say, then what is wrong with Africa? You and I know that we've never really got our independence. We were given formal independence, what I will call signature on paper independence. At the time that the colonial powers were leaving, they made sure that leaders of their own choice got the rulership position in Africa. They killed off African nationalists that were too radical. They killed them off. And even after independence, especially in French-speaking African countries, they got rid of prime ministers who, after independence, wanted to make independence a reality by using, of course, Africans who had served in the French colonial army. They used them. Sylvanus Olympio in Togo, who wanted, his only crime was that he wanted a Togolese currency. He didn't want to use the French CFR with the French set up for common currency. They didn't want to use it. The French got a Yadema who was a sergeant in the French colonial army, but who, on the eve of independence, had been brought back and installed in the Togolese army to assassinate him, and took over. And that was repeated in several French African countries. We now know, because the documents have been released, that the British and the Americans were behind the coup in Ghana that got rid of Kwame Nkrumah. They were the one who aided and abetted Kotoka and Afrifa to overthrow him. And it's only recently, when I started reading the documents released, that I even knew that coup in Ghana was very, very bloody. That they actually hunted down loyal Ghanaian officers who were loyal to Kwame Nkrumah. So when you say what is wrong with us, that is wrong with us. We have never been left alone. Not only has Israel been left alone, Israel has benefited from massive infusion of funds, whether from the United States or Germany, to Israel. Whereas Africa, what's been taken out of Africa is probably 2/3 of what has come in terms of foreign assistance, foreign aid to Africa. They've taken more out of Africa, and they're still taking more out of Africa today. So that's what is wrong with us. Nothing is wrong with us as Africans, but we are not left alone. And if you make too much noise, you get assassinated.
Wow. Wow. Prof, let's go to North Korea. We've seen a bit of a somewhat softening of the narrative from Kim Jong Un, where he's starting to describe the situation as the worst they've ever seen in their country from an economic perspective. It seems like the sanctions are really starting to bite. Um, are we starting to see a shift in the narrative from North Korea such that they may now start to listen to what is happening externally?
No. The North Koreans are also masters of the art of the game. Um, right now, they are playing good cop, bad cop. Uh, uh, the leader of North Korea is the good cop. His sister is the bad cop. She's the one who's tough, who is making radical speeches, while he now appears to be going soft. I don't buy it. The objective of the North Korean leadership has never changed. One, they want to become a nuclear power. And believe me, they are quite close to that. Number two, they want to make sure, they can never be as powerful as the United States, but they want to make sure that if they are attacked by the Americans, the price America will pay for that invasion, America will not be prepared to pay it. This is a strategic doctrine that faced with a more powerful enemy than you are, raise your own military preparedness and military access to a level where even though your adversary can defeat you, but the punishment you will inflict on that adversary will be such that the population of your adversary will not allow their government to embark on such a venture. Now, I'm not saying that North Korea will attack the United States. No. But the whole essence of their missile program is to be able to hit what? South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, uh, and this America will have to factor into whatever retaliatory process that he thinks North Korea will be. So that is in addition to its having a nuclear power. So now all those objectives will not change if the North Korean leader sounds conciliatory. It's probably to tell the Americans, well, we are prepared to negotiate, while he goes on with his nuclear preparation. He did it to Trump. He did it to Trump. And who won? He won. He did it to Obama, not in the sense of being willing to talk to Obama, but Obama had come to the conclusion that a war with North Korea is a non-starter. So Obama adopted diplomatic doctrine of constructive waiting. Maybe they'll be able to wait out North Korea, maybe to be able to collapse under its own internal contradictions. But it didn't happen. It's been very, very clever about it, because keep in mind that North Korea has a common border with China. China does not want a disintegrated North Korea that will lead to massive exiles coming into China and disrupt whatever may be the program of development that China has for that area. China doesn't want that, which is also part of the calculation of China with Myanmar right now. You take into consideration that you just can't take the exiles who destabilize the whole of that area. So I'm not buying into any conciliatory move by the North Korean leadership.
Hmm. Prof, I think we can take one question more about the United States. And there's a question here that I want to put to you, and this is the new law that was signed in Georgia, and that has been getting quite some reaction there. And one of the things the legislation said, and I'll read it out here, it talks about imposing voter identification requirements for absentee ballots. It talks about allowing state officials to take over local elections boards. It talks about limiting the use of ballot drop boxes. And it also talks about making it a crime to give voters food and drink as they wait in line. Um, what do you have to say to this, Prof?
You know, if I'm not careful, I probably I will get tagged as an anti-American scholar. The United States has been the most, excuse me, the United States has been the luckiest country in the world, in the sense that it got us all to buy into the fantasy that the United States is a beacon of democracy. Even when you had lynchings going on in the South, the UN dared not raise it, so they didn't raise it. Even when we became members of the United Nations, we didn't. I mean, we focused on South Africa. We didn't focus on the fate of the African Americans. And so all these laws were there. We didn't talk about them. Even when Martin Luther King Jr. started the civil rights agitation, we really didn't give him the kind of support that we should have given him. And the Russians adopted what I would regard as a failure of diplomatic strategy, in the sense that rather than talk about ideology, Marxism, and what have you, they should have continued to pound on the fate and the status of the African Americans and say to us, is that what you want for your kids and kin, and still be voting along with America? But you see, each time the United States runs into some problem, or it will talk about the uniqueness of the American democracy. The Senate needs 60%, 60 votes to adopt some fundamental legislation. The Senate can filibuster things that make for American progress. And they fling it in your face. This is American uniqueness. And you are making progress on civil rights instead of rejoicing with the rest of the world that you've got a vice president who is an African American. You now decide to spend that time rolling out legislation that will impact negatively on the rights of African Americans or people of color. I think that is the correct language now. People of color to vote. It will impact negatively on them. And you are telling the rest of the world, please don't talk about us. This is uniquely American. And then one governor from one of those states will tomorrow become president of the United States, and he will be wondering why is he not being received with applause in the rest of the world. I think the time has come to call America out that you are not a democracy. Whatever it is you may be operating, it is not democracy. And there are other countries. They may not be democratic, they never claim to be democratic, but who are marching on in terms of development and who will catch our attention while you continue to revel in whatever it is you think the rest of the world should embrace, but people will just laugh. Oh, that's America for you. So
Wow.
I'm rather, I know the American president has spoken out very harshly against this new rules, rollback. And that's what I would even call it, rollback on civil rights. And I applaud him for that, his courage in speaking out forcefully. But I think that at the end of the day, it's the United States that will get hurt in terms of the international its status in the global scene.
Wow. Wow. Prof, thank you once again for this evening. Um, and to our viewers, thank you for being there. We'll be back again same time next week, 7 p.m. In Nigeria and in the UK and all over the world. You can pick your time from there. But Prof, I want to put this out there. Next week, when we come, there is a question I want to put to you, and that is about what has happened in the UK to the Myanmar ambassador who has been locked out of the embassy. I would like to put that to you next week, Prof, because
Okay,
it's an important one for you to address, but we cannot take it today as we've run out of time. But we will bring that next week. All right,
okay.
to our viewers, thank you. Thank you, Prof.